Hey, this is Nicky G and welcome to Better Commander. Today we're exploring weird counter tribal with Perrie the Pulverizer. Now before we put on our safari hat and delve into the urban jungle of New Capenna, let's take a minute to gently, lovingly smooch the subscribe button. That's how I'll escape this basement to stand on the mountaintop and be able to eventually afford a Birds of Paradise from M12. Perrie the Pulverizer is 1 green, blue, and a white for a legendary creature, Rhino Soldier 3/3. This guy skipped leg day, he's a rhino, for Christ's sake, he's a 3/3. Come on. When Perrie enters the battlefield, put a shield counter on target creature. If it would be dealt damage or destroyed, remove a shield counter from it instead. Whenever Perrie attacks, target creature you control gains trample and gets +X/+X, where X is the number of different kinds of counters among permanents you control. Let's take a moment to just appreciate the art on this big fella. I have no lore, but it's a bearded rhino wearing a monocle, armored up in a pinstripe suit. Oh, he has a hammer as well. He kind of looks like a Scottish brewmaster or something, like an anthropomorphized Prohibition-era business rhino. Anyway, he likes weird counters, and fortunately Magic is full of crazy counters. But if we went pure wild counters, we would have an anti-synergistic mess. I think for a commander like this, we need a solid base of +1/+1 counter synergies that can feed Perrie with the good cards that use feather counters or fade counters or whatever. Let's take a look at some cards that would be good in a Perrie deck. ICorium was a great set. I have to say that right up front. It was one of my favorites over the past couple of years. It had a bunch of weird mechanics. The most evergreen and interesting for this deck is the keyword counters that came with some cards. So we have Vivian, Monster's Advocate, 3 green for a legendary planeswalker, Vivian. You may look at the top card of your library at any time, and you may cast creature spells from the top of your library. Very powerful static ability on this planeswalker. Her +1 ability is create a 3/3 green beast creature token. Put your choice of a vigilance counter, a reach counter, or a trample counter on it. -2 when you cast your next creature spell this turn. Search your library for a creature card with lesser mana value, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. This is a great card in this deck. A Perrie deck will necessarily need to run a large amount of creatures. Vivian can provide tremendous value. Its plus feeds into our weird counter subtheme and makes its own token, and her minus can get us synergistic cards right out of the deck. Speaking of which, right off the rip, we have Crystalline Giant. It's costs 3 generic mana, artifact creature, giant, 3/3. At the beginning of combat on your turn, choose a kind of counter at random that Crystalline Giant doesn't have from among flying, first strike, death touch, hexproof, lifelink, menace, reach, trample, vigilance, and +1/+1. Put a counter of that kind on Crystalline Giant. This can get annoying to keep track of. You may just want to get a dry erase board to keep track of your counters for this big idiot. Next we have the ICorium Mentors. Apparently this is a group of furry cosplayers who put on funny counters on their friends on Friday nights. Hornbash Mentor, Keensight Mentor are decent examples and can get Perrie or some other creatures cool counters. Oh, and then we have these guys, the Hunt Bonders. There's a couple of Bonders who meet on Thursday evenings for their cosplay parties. Avenging Hunt Bonder and our favorite, Slippery Bog Bonder. So this is 3 and a green for a creature, a human druid, 3/3. Flash, hexproof. When Slippery Bog Bonder enters the battlefield, put a hexproof counter on target creature, then move any number of counters from among creatures you control onto that creature. I'm not sure why an animal wants to hang out and be your best friend when you're wearing their Cousin Louie as a hat, but these guys get away with it. Looks suspiciously like Christina Ricci as well. Now the Azolith 100% belongs in this deck. I think it's pretty expensive now, it's like $25. So the Azolith costs 1 generic mana for a legendary artifact. Whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, if it had counters on it, put those counters on the Azolith. So this is perfect for a counters deck. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if the Azolith has counters on it, you may move all counters from the Azolith onto target creature. This can help us recover nicely after a board wipe, and you know we're going to get board wiped. You know what else is great after a board wipe? Bringing back all of your creatures with flying counters on them. So lastly from ICorium, we have Luminous Broodmoth, the big daddy moth that puts flying counters on our dead creatures. It's 2 white for a creature insect flying. Whenever a creature you control without flying dies, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a flying counter on it. This card's awesome. It's about $8. You know what else is a counter? A level counter. Hexdrinker is 1 green mana and is just generally a good card. If we can level him up, we can get a decent Voltron creature that can wear our counters. The problem with this guy is that he's pretty expensive from modern format. I'm going to take a look at the level up creatures. There's quite a few in these colors. Enclave Cryptologist is a decent one as well. There are a couple of mana dorks that rely on counters as well. Gyre Sage and Channeler Initiate. Both utilize different types of counters, +1 and -1 respectively. If you can proliferate Gyre Sage, watch out Sally Struthers. Speaking of proliferate, Contagion Clasp and Contagion Engine can help us control the board and multiply our counters. These two kind of got edged out in recent years by cheaper proliferate effects, but they're still fantastic cards. Contagion Engine can really control our opponent's boards and is a mini sweeper that can take out masses of tokens. It costs 6 generic mana. It's an artifact. When Contagion Engine enters the battlefield, put a -1/-1 counter on each creature target player controls. So this is really good for our opponents who are going off with tokens. And it has the activated ability 4 and tap, proliferate, and then proliferate again. Evolution Sage. This is an interesting card. It can be very valuable to a deck relying on counters, and we're going to be playing lands, hopefully. Evolution Sage is 2 and a green for a creature, Elf Druid. It's a 3/2. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, proliferate. Speaking of lands and creatures, I don't know how to say this guy's name, so I'm just going to say Chulane. Teller of Tales is great in any Bant deck running 40+ creatures. This guy is 2 green, white, and a blue for a legendary creature. Human Druid, it's a 2/4 with Vigilance. Whenever you cast a creature spell, draw a card. Then you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. This is a crazy ability. 3 and tap. You can return target creature you control to its owner's hand, so you can double up on your enter the battlefield abilities. This guy's awesome. If you build a deck around this guy as a commander, you're just going to get taken out real early if you don't just win on the spot. However, in the 99, this can be a great card to maximize value. And from Kamigawa, we have the modified mechanic that'll trigger off of all of our weird counters. Kodama of the West Tree, this is a fantastic card I did a deck tech on, is 2 and a green. Legendary creature, Spirit, 3/3, has a reach. Modified creatures you control have trample. Equipment auras and counters are modifications. Whenever a modified creature you control deals combat damage to a player, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, tap, and then shuffle. This guy is great in this deck. It's going to be a combat-focused deck, and hopefully we'll get at least a couple lands off of this guy. I'd say if you get 2, you definitely got your money back. Okay, fringe playable card incoming. Chronozoa, the flying amoeba, comes with time counters. I am unaware of any other playable cards with time counters, so yeah, maybe give it a shot. The Evolve mechanic may be real useful in decks like these, although most of the cards with Evolve mechanic are less than awesome. But you do have, along with Gyre Sage, we have Fathom Mage, which has been a favorite card of mine forever. I never hesitate to bring this card up. I think it kind of hits that sweet spot. It's not super powerful, however, you can definitely break it in a +1/+1 counter deck. So Fathom Mage is 2 green and a blue for a creature. Human Wizard, it's a 1/1. Has Evolve. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, if that creature has greater power or toughness than this creature, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. And whenever you put a +1/+1 counter on Fathom Mage, you may draw a card. So along with cards like Vorinclex, Monstrous Raider, and Hardened Scales, things like this that double our counters or create more counters, this thing's going to draw a ton of cards. Speaking of Vorinclex, Vorinclex Monstrous Raider synergizes well with shield counters, which I'm sure will be a thing when the entire new Capenna set is spoiled. Why is this card $40? This is so expensive. Vorinclex Monstrous Raider is 4 green for a legendary creature, Phyrexian Praetor. It's a 6/6, has trample and haste. Awesome. If you would put 1 or more counters on a permanent or player, put twice that many of each of those kinds of counters on that permanent or player instead. If an opponent would put 1 or more counters on a permanent or player, they put half that many of those kinds of counters on that permanent or player instead, rounded down. If we lean into the +1/+1 counters theme, this guy's going to be awesome. And if we're that far in, we might as well put in Simic Ascendancy. So this is going to be a shoe-in. So Simic Ascendancy is green and a blue for an enchantment. 1 green and a blue, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. That's great. Whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on a creature you control, you may put that many growth counters on Simic Ascendancy. I don't know of any other cards that have growth counters. At the beginning of your upkeep, if Simic Ascendancy has 20 or more growth counters on it, you win the game. So I've definitely won games with this in Zaxara and some other decks. I think it'd be great in a deck like this as well. Although I'd rarely use this card in a blue deck, Tome of Legends gets page counters. I think it would synergize well with Perrie as he has an attack trigger, so we're going to be attacking all the time anyway, and hopefully drawing a modest amount of cards off of this Tome of Legends. Uh-oh, we're really reaching now, straight into the bulk bin for Eye of Doom. So this is 4 generic mana for an artifact. When Eye of Doom enters the battlefield, each player chooses a non-land permanent and puts a Doom counter on it. 2 and tap, sacrifice Eye of Doom, destroy each permanent with a Doom counter on it. So you can just put the Doom counter on Eye of Doom. You'd have to have other threats to the table for everyone to agree on. Say an annoying Smothering Tithe or Rhystic Study. This may be reserved for casual decks only. I know some people love cards like this, political cards, but I'm skittish about not knowing what will get blown up. I mean, you could easily just play this and everybody puts things on your stuff. One of the first cards I thought of when I saw Perrie spoiled was Beastmaster Ascension. This is a great card in a combat-focused deck and can be a win condition given the right board. So Beastmaster Ascension is 2 and a green for an enchantment. Whenever a creature you control attacks, you may put a quest counter on Beastmaster Ascension. As long as Beastmaster Ascension has 7 or more quest counters on it, creatures you control get +5/+5. And while we're on enchantments, we can feed into our counter strategy with Jugen Defends the Temple. I don't know who Jugen was or why he was defending the temple. Both sides of this card give us counters. The first in the saga gets us a cool little mana dork, and these sagas have lore counters. Jugen Defends the Temple is 2 and a green for an enchantment saga. As the saga enters the battlefield and after your draw step, add a lure counter. So the first one is create a 1/1 green human monk token with tap, add green. The second is put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures, which fits with our deck's theme. And 3 is exile the saga, return it to the battlefield transformed, and the other side is Remnant of the Rising Star. So this is an enchantment creature, Dragon Spirit. It's a 2/2 with flying. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay X. When you do, put X +1/+1 counters on that creature. So there you go. As long as you control 5 or more modified creatures, Remnant of the Rising Star gets +5/+5 and has trample. So this can be a big beater in the late game if we can get up to 5 modified creatures. Oh, who can forget Erzas Saga with its kooky lore counters and soul ring fetching ability. This is a great card in, well, basically just about any deck. You're also going to keep your eye out for lands that have counters on them. So off the top of my head, there's the Vivid lands we can run that also get us charge counters to help fix mana, but they come in tapped and make me crazy. There's Llanowar Reborn, a couple other ones. New Capenna might be one of these sets that I buy all 5 of the commander decks and keep them sealed or open them. I'm liking what I see so far. Very unique commanders. Anyway, after mocking up a deck list and leaning into the +1/+1 counter synergy, this list is surprisingly playable and can sit comfortably at mid-power tables if built right. So I hope you saw some cards that you never did before, and you can shoot me some cards that I missed in the comments below. I want to thank you guys for watching, and this is going to be Nikki G from Better Commander, signing off.